Hello, and welcome to the Lost Decades podcast. This is episode 2, where we will be going through the years 2000 BC up to about 1980 BC. I'm Austin,
And I'm Andrew.
and we are trying out, if you're watching us on video, sharing our screen. So we've got our brand new cover art here. Uh, if you're listening, go ahead and give us 5 stars and add us on Instagram at the Lost Decades Podcast.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to start out the episode with some corrections because we are, I would say, amateur historians, to put it lightly.
Yeah.
We're not always going to be 100% accurate. Obviously, we try to be as accurate as possible, but especially with stuff this long ago, it can be difficult. But I want to at least do some corrections if I realize later on that we were not accurate. So, first off, the Green Sahara, I mentioned that, and I wasn't really sure when that was happening, but that was just the idea that um, long ago the Sahara Desert was green, and it's called like the humid Sahara time period or something. But basically, the timeline for that is from 4000 to 3500 BC is when it's really starting to dry back up again. So it had been humid starting in like, I don't know, 10,000 BC, and then now it's starting to really get dried up quickly. And then from 2500 to 2000 is when it's really becoming fully arid. So there's only scattered oases and river valleys, and that's when populations are starting to migrate, or they'd already been there, but they've really started to migrate into like the Nile River.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it really does make sense if you think about it that like if you imagine all of Africa was basically green, there would be like people everywhere. And then as it gets dry super fast, all of a sudden people are freaking out and they're like just trying to find any river. And then once you're kind of on the Nile, you're sort of stuck because any direction you go besides south and north, which you're still in Egypt most of
Yeah.
the time, you're just in full desert where you're gonna die. So once you kind of are in Egypt, it's very difficult to leave. One
It kind
thing
of
I
explains too how Egypt was clearly so much more fertile back then than it seems to be
hmm
now. Not that it's not fertile now, but
hmm
I'm guessing to a much greater extent back then.
Right. And it kind of makes sense why people might be more willing to kind of be basically like a menial laborer and build the pyramids and things like that because their only other option is like the Sahara Desert. And they're like, all right, these people control this entire river, like the only area in this entire huge region that is even habitable at all. So, yeah, it's just fun to think about. I feel like we always imagine countries nowadays as kind of like blocks, just kind of like a square or something, but Egypt back then was really like super tall and skinny. It was almost like Chile, where
Yeah.
it's just a
Yeah. It
long
was basically
river.
just what was around the river. And
Right.
it kind of like the borders were more faded as it goes out. And that's what's funny too, is obviously things are different than nowadays, but one of the key things too is that borders are not that well defined. It's kind of like a blur. There's not really a line like this is Egypt, this isn't Egypt. It's kind of just how much they could project their control, which would obviously
hmm
switch based on who's king or what, just day to day. It could just be different.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's like we're looking back on it and it's based on what the kings are talking about. Like, oh yeah, this is the region I control, but who knows if they're making that up.
Yeah.
We might have some evidence of like, oh yeah, like if we look all the way down this far into Egypt, we see like this coin, so we can tell like the coins at least traveled like this far down, so he had some amount of like control of it or something.
Yeah.
One last thing I wanted to mention, kind of related to the Green Sahara thing, was I just think this is really cool to think about, and it's related to the Green Sahara, but there's this thing called the 4.2 kiloyear event, which just sounds like very sci-fi, but it's the way they describe it is an aridification event, which is like a long-term drought that happened 4,200 years ago. It was one of the most severe climatic events of like recent history, and it basically starts like a new age. But that was in 2200 BC. You
Damn.
know, like about 100 years before or 200 years before we're talking about today. But
But still recent enough to have a big impact.
definitely
So,
having a big impact. And it's, yeah, if I wanted to give at least some background on it, but it was pretty cool because there's a pretty strong theory that this event caused, or at least helped cause, the collapse of Old Kingdom in Egypt, the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, I guess the Langzhou culture in like near China, and might have also done it for the Indus Valley. So it kind of explains why there does seem to be a lot of these like civilizations collapsing like all around each other. And this seems like a pretty good reason.
yeah.
The only other correction I wanted to make before we really jump in was that I had kind of talked about in the Indus Valley how they had like the Indo-Europeans had like come in from more like Central Europe and started this whole caste system, but that happens way later. So I was wrong on that. That doesn't happen until like 1600 BC.
Okay.
So the Indus Valley at this time, basically from 3300 all the way until like 1600 BC, or maybe even later, they're just sort of essentially the native people of the Indus Valley are living there. All right, so we are going to start the year 2000, the new millennium BC, um, in Egypt. And Andrew, why don't you take it away? What's going on in Egypt in the year 2000?
Well, in 2000, it's the very end of the reign of Mentuhotep III, following his father, who unified Egypt and ruled for a very long time, 50 years. His son only ruled for about, I think it was about 14.
Yeah, he had a short Wikipedia article.
And he was more just about stabilizing and consolidating power, which kind of makes sense after a big unifying figure like Mentuhotep II. And so we're kind of looking at a changing period in Egypt again, ironically, um, because as Mentuhotep IV takes over in 1997 BC, um, there is a lot of instability. A lot of rebellions have been flaring up, mainly due to the tight iron grip of the ruling class, if you will. As I said before, Mentuhotep and his sons and grandsons did ruled kind of brutally. They pretty much decimated any kind of rebellion, killed all the perpetrators, tortured people, and made an example out of everyone. And so it's funny how in history sometimes that can work to stabilize things or it can go in the other way. And in this case, it kind of did. So as they tried to put down more rebellions, more were popping up. And so even Mentuhotep IV, we don't know as much about him simply because of funny factors. So one of the few things we know about him is that he sent out his vizier and some other people to gather um, stone for his sarcophagus, which a lot of people have alluded to the fact that he probably was either old or dying when he took over and was already focused on trying to just get his burial and everything ready to go. A funny thing too I found out is they don't know if Mentuhotep IV was the son of Mentuhotep II or the third. They said it's possible that the fourth was a brother of the
And they just
third.
all have the same name.
Yeah, and he kind of just took over. I mean, I guess it was common to just take the king's name. Um, he is omitted from a lot of the king's lists. I guess they have different lists on different tombs in different areas, kind of listing the kings and stuff like that. But that could be because the funny thing is when he sent his vizier, and it's important to know his vizier's name was Amenemhet, Amenemhat. Um, and he went out, gathered all this stuff, and then we don't really know what happened, and then
What do you mean gathered all this stuff? Like,
gathered all of the stone and the bronze they were going to use for the sarcophagus and the burial
okay.
place. And then next in the record, there's a new king, Amenemhat the First. Funny enough, the vizier.
Right, but we don't technically we don't know if it's the same guy, right?
Yes, they're pretty sure
I
because of
mean,
the
yeah,
name
that would
thing,
be an
but
insane coincidence.
it's just the funniest thing that it's like it's not technically proven, and you can it kind of I guess makes sense. They said we're technically not sure if it was a peaceful transition of power or a violent one, but it leans towards the latter simply because when he took over, he had to brutally go around and suppress everything. So one of the things I thought was funny though is while he was still vizier, I wrote it down here, he had a I don't know what the type of thing would be called, like an epitaph or something, where you have a lot of titles in Egypt. And this was still when he was vizier, and it kind of points to his ambitions. And I just thought it was funny because they said, um, Amen, Amenhotep, the member of the elite, high official, overseer of the city, vizier, overseer of officials, lord of judgment, overseer of everything in the entire land, the great vizier Amenemhet.
Wait, that was his title when he was still vizier?
When he was still vizier.
He's like, yeah, and one of my titles is I'm the king of everything in the whole world and the
Yeah,
universe.
no big deal or anything. He was known for his modesty, as you can tell.
Definitely. Well, all the pharaohs were very, very modest,
Yeah, I mean,
famously. Yeah,
so
that's funny. And I don't know, it does make me think, like, I feel like one reason the Egyptians were so into this, I feel like they were very much like, we rule everything, like, we're so powerful. And I feel like it's because of the environment. If you live there, it does feel like that's the whole world because you're trapped. So it doesn't
mhm,
really matter that they don't control Mesopotamia or Europe or something because it's like you're never gonna go there.
yeah. Mentuhotep the First was removed or stripped from as many things as possible and replaced with Amenhotep the First. In fact, there's a lot of stone carvings and stuff like that that either look damaged or broken. And what's funny is for some of them, we don't know if that's just from time or other people later, or if it was Amenhotep the First that was the one who was knocking those off. But there are other records where it's clear that he was removed and Amenhotep the First was kind of put in his place, kind of trying to, even though he's the beginning of the 12th dynasty, the previous one being the 11th, he's kind of trying to, like mini kings, tie himself to the previous ones for legitimacy reasons, trying to show that he deserved to be there. Um,
Yeah, and in case you don't know, that is how they divide up Egyptian history is by these dynasties, where even all the way back in 2000 BC, we're already on the 12th dynasty of the Middle Kingdom.
For
So then,
perspective, too, to show
yeah,
how old it is, the ones who built the pyramids, the Great Pyramids of Giza, were the fourth dynasty. So we're already way past that.
wow.
And
Yeah,
speaking of
and
that, actually, one of the things is Amenhotep wanted to bring back, because I don't know if I mentioned last time, Mentuhotep kind of was like, we're done with pyramids. We don't need pyramids anymore. They had been kind of out of fashion. They hadn't been that popular. But Amenhotep the First, Amenhotep the First, was basically like, we're going to bring back pyramids. But funny enough, I don't know if the money was not there or his heart was not in it, but they did not build them to the same grandeur. I wouldn't even say scale because obviously that would be insane, but
it
they
was a
used
pale
much worse
imitation.
materials. They were built over a much shorter period of time, and his pyramid, they was estimated when it was built from the records was about 80 meters tall,
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
and currently it's just like a mound of dirt that I think is only 20 meters tall.
It literally looks like a landfill where they just have a big or like a big pile of sand in a construction site.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite look like Giza. I'll say that.
And it's funny because, not to bring up other history, but Amenhotep, I'm just ruining the name.
Let's call him Amy.
Amy, yeah, Amy the First. So he pulled basically a King Louis the XIV and said, "All right, there's too much stuff going on in the capital. I'm tired of all of the other nobles and stuff getting in my way, so I'm gonna make a brand new capital, basically 30 miles south of Memphis, and essentially
See.
proclaim that as the new capital.
Okay.
And that was called Ijitawi. Ijitawi.
Mm-hmm.
And its full name was Amenemhetep Ichitawi, but it was mostly called Itawi.
But that
And
meant something, right?
it does. It just meant seize the two lands because it was
Because
called
he,
Amenemhet seizes the two lands. But that was kind of a long name, so they just kind of called it there.
yeah, it's funny. I feel like the Spanish like to do that too, where like the full name of Los Angeles is like the city of angels overseen by the archangel Michael and Gabriel,
Yeah.
like. Well, is there anything else you wanted to say about Egypt? And the so he starts the 12th dynasty,
He
and
does.
I read that basically then now the power is kind of moved. You said they moved the capital, but also I think like because Amy was from like the Aswan region, which is basically more like southern Egypt. It seems like essentially they had like darker features, and that seems to be what the 12th dynasty. What it says the 12th dynasty lasts all the way until 1786.
Yeah, about 200 years. And from what I read, it he kind of, maybe not him specifically, but his reign starts off a new golden age for Egypt, which we will obviously be getting into in later episodes.
And that is pretty cool because wasn't it just last episode, was it like 2050 when the 11th dynasty started, and that was the first, wasn't that the first one after the intermediate period?
Yes, and so there wasn't an intermediate period between these two. It basically went straight
It
from
just
the
went straight into it, yeah,
yeah, from the 11th to the 12th.
but the 12th is way longer than the 11th.
Yeah, the 11th only lasted about 70 years, and you got to think 50 of it was meant to Hotep the second. So,
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah,
but all
so
right.
kind of a fun little story. I like the idea, like that. I can picture that in my head so well of like this like vizier who goes with the pharaoh to gather some materials, and then he ends up just like stabbing him in the back or something, and somehow being like, "And now I'm the king."
Yeah.
Do you think it
And
was just
then
like he's like, "Well, I'm the most powerful person, and now he's dead, so I might as well be pharaoh"?
yeah, one of the funny things too I found out was the reason we also don't know a lot about Mentuhotep the Fourth is his burial site has not been found. We don't know where
That's
it is.
pretty cool. That would be
Yeah.
cool. We should try to find it.
Yeah. No, it's easy. We'll just get a I was gonna say metal detector, but that wouldn't do any good.
And yeah, I'm actually reading here. I'm looking at this timeline, and it says that the whole Middle Kingdom only goes until 1782 or 86. So that it's like this dynasty, when this ends, it's going to start the second intermediate period. So we're going to be in this dynasty for at least a couple episodes. Before we move away from Africa, I just wanted to check back in with the Kush region, also known as Nubia, also known as the Kingdom of Kerma. It's doing its thing down there. It's a trading hub between Egypt and the rest of Africa, almost like, I don't know, like Uzbekistan on like the Silk Road, just kind of like this middle ground. Um, and yeah, they had advanced pottery and metallurgy going
Well,
on. So you
and
got over, I was
during
going to say, the
Amenhotep,
Bronze Age, in case I didn't mention.
during this guy's reign, about partway through, the Nubians start to kind of pester on their borders and fashion themselves more as Egyptian kings and queens,
Hmm.
taking on some of that culture.
And I do think there is a Nubian like dynasty at some point.
There is.
All right. So now we are moving into the other big player from this time, Mesopotamia. And we've got the rise of the Old Babylon period, which starts in 2000 BC, but really it is the Isin Larsa period. We're not quite
Yes.
in Babylon, which is where we're going to hear about like Hammurabi and all this interesting stuff, but we're almost in like the intermediate period for Mesopotamia, right?
Yeah. And that's caused by a couple of things, but one of the biggest ones being the Amorite kind of migration into this area. So the Amorites were nomads, and they were mainly kind of, I guess, semi-nomadic herders, kind of staying in one area for a while the herd grazes, and then when they need to move because of weather or something like that, they move somewhere else. But as they saw that Ur's power was kind of waning in the around 2000 BC, with its ultimate collapse in 2004 BC, um, they start to move in and kind of fill in that power vacuum. And they kind of spread over three phases, which is an interesting thing. This didn't all happen in 2000 BC. This happened over like 60 or 70 years. But what I thought was interesting was they started off as invading and dominating Palestine before they moved north into modern day Syria and held several of the cities up there. And then third, they moved down into northern and southern Mesopotamia to establish dynasties at Isin, Larsa, and Babylon. So those are all Amorite dynasties at this time. But what's interesting too is they essentially were so enamored, impressed, I don't know what the word is to say, that with these cities and their technological advancement and their art and their engineering, that within a couple of decades they blended in and were pretty much indistinguishable from the population. They basically became locals, if you will.
Okay, interesting. So basically, it's called the Isin Larsa period because there's a kingdom Isin and there's another kingdom Larsa, who are the two biggest kingdoms, but they're neither of them are really, you could say, are have like a monopoly on power, I guess. And then yeah, so that's why it's called that, right?
Yes. And what's interesting is the last king Ibisin of
Mm.
Ur
Mhm.
actually appointed the who becomes king of Ishin,
Mm.
and his name is Ishbi Era, Erra, Ishbi Era. And so it's
Interesting.
funny that there's a lot of records of him actually, you know, asking for more power, saying, "Hey, I want to be governor," because at the time when Ur was still in power, even waning, um, Ishin was under control. Um, of Ur. And he basically said, "Oh, I want to be governor. I'll support you guys and stuff." And then essentially the king of Ur was like, "No, you're not. I'm not going to let you do that." And basically he went, "Well, I'm basically going to do it anyway." So he does. He takes over and is honestly
He
a little
takes
vassal
over
at the beginning.
Ur.
What?
So takes over the city of Ur.
No, no, no. He takes over the city of Isin,
Oh, of
which
Isin,
is a vassal of Ur.
which is oh, so it becomes like independent.
Yeah, and then eventually it becomes independent, and he tries to essentially, um, so Ishbi Era essentially tries to fashion himself as the kings of Ur. Essentially, like I am the successor, since he was essentially a leading governor and politician during that time period. He holds the city for a little bit. Not that he loses it, but then he ends up pushing back and pushing out
Elamites?
Elamites. They're the ones who ended up conquering and subjugating. Well, they didn't really subjugate; they destroyed the city of Ur and
Right.
left the garrison there. And so he kind of came in and took over those cities and essentially tried to say, okay, we're not creating the new Ur Empire, but we're starting, the rise of Ishin. But
Mhm.
obviously, Ishin was not nearly as powerful and had to contend with several other city states and their independence, chief among them Babylon. But another one that I thought was interesting that we won't go into, but it's because it becomes a major player later, that they kind of had a little beef with was the city of Assur, if that name sounds
Okay.
familiar.
I'm looking forward to it. Apologies, my cat
So
is getting very excited. Um, awesome. Yeah, that is pretty interesting that it is almost like a full continuation of because the first leader was literally a part of it, and then it kind of just I feel like that's what we're going to see a lot of in Mesopotamia in general is like these little cities or like one guy that's from this city ends up getting power and then that starts like a new empire. So but it's all kind of the same area. It's just who is in control, like what city is in control of it. And then I guess that culture of that city is going to be more powerful. And Like I'm seeing here that I guess now the language is becoming Akkadian and like the Sumerian language is dying out or becoming
Yeah.
less like popular.
And it's funny how it's not really an Amorite language or anything like that either, because again, they blended in so well that they pretty much saw themselves as Akkadian or Sumerian.
And it is kind of cool, or just it's nice and neat that seems to collapse like right around the year 2000. It's kind of a clean like Ur's done. Now it's this. Well, then we get the period, this transition we're in, but then we're gonna get to Babylon.
And that's the cool thing is it's anyone's game. Obviously, we know history by looking into it, but at this time period, all the city states are like, "Holy crap, we can take it all for ourselves." Maybe not even through conquest, but we can be the successors. Each city is Babylon, Assur, Ishin, Larsa. It's there's just so many people kind of doing their own thing.
And it's kind of funny. I'm seeing like some of the evidence we even have of the history of this period and like of is so they wrote these like lamentation, like dramatic poems about falling and like how great it was. Like it's great cities Uruk, Nippur, and Eridu. But apparently it was mainly an attempt to justify and like legitimize the rule of the new masters by making it seem like it was this really dramatic, like divine decision.
Yeah, no, I read that as well. I thought that was interesting that they're specifically lamenting. They're just like, "Oh man, I can't believe they fell. God must have been against them, but obviously
But we're in charge now.
we'll take up the mantle, like we'll wear that burden, but we won't forget them."
Yeah. It's funny how often people do something like that where you'd think that they would be hating on the older people more, but they actually like really like, respect them because they it makes them look better because like wow, these guys were so great and we're like the continuation of them, right? So like that means
Yeah.
we're really cool too. Um yeah, so just to wrap up, or I'm also just seeing that apparently it was never quite as it never quite reached the peak of like the Akkadian Empire that had come before them.
Yeah, they said mostly because they didn't go for territorial conquest, which is almost something that you'd want to applaud. Like, I mean,
Right, they're
to put it
more
in terms
peaceful
of almost
maybe.
like a video game, they're not playing wide, they're playing tall. They're like,
Oh,
let's just focus on building up our sorry, building up like, our politics, our economy, all this stuff. And it's kind of funny to look at because they're not seen as so great, but because of what they did is what allowed these other cities to rise. Because had the region constantly just been dominated by warfare all the time, then without this sort of maybe it wasn't a peace because we don't know much about the battles at the time, but by focusing on trade and technological advancement and governing and economy has just allowed all these other states to kind of like we talked about before. You can kind of see the failures of the previous one and the things that worked and establish those into yourself. And as we'll see later, has led to a lot of these other cities learning from them, learning from and essentially taking it to the next level.
right. Yeah, it's sort of building on what came before and I guess yeah, what's it called? Like standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's cool, you know. And that's why I really am enjoying this podcast so far because it's fun to kind of see like where it's all beginning and then we're gonna see like as things get more and more powerful, like how it all started and yeah.
Oh, and I forgot to share. I've got a map of the region at the time
Well, let's take a look.
so that we can kind of give just a little idea of what it looked like. Here we go. Oh, sorry. Wrong one. That is a map of Egypt.
Well, you know,
Hey,
take a
I mean,
quick
I'll show
look.
that as well. Here we go. As you can see, the city states are really the most powerful ones seem to be clustered for now, seem to be clustered more towards the south. But as we'll see later, some of the northern ones begin to gain power, but that's for a later time. But yeah, if you see down here, this Elam, they're the ones who came in this way, took over and the some of the other cities. Isin over here stayed by itself, came down and reconquered these to kind of maintain control. You have Babylon up here, Asur up here, Mari, which becomes a player later as well up there. And yeah, I also looked up apparently Nipper. I don't know too many facts about it, but apparently that is sort of the spiritual center of their religions, where like their high priest is and where they worship the gods and stuff like that.
Nipper, I barely know her. All right, let's move on to. I already mentioned the Indus Valley. It's where there's the Harappan civilization, and it's in the mature period, so it's kind of just right in the center. And I think there are, vague trade networks connecting kind of the Mesopotamia area to Asia, but nothing too serious. Just, I'm sure there's like a tiny bit of trading, but this was interesting. In Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey, and at one point was the Byzantine Empire. But right now it is the Hittites, which are one of those people that you never really hear about normally. But once you start digging into ancient history and this general, like the BCs, they are actually pretty big players. I keep saying that word, but they are. You just see them come up a lot. So they're up there in Turkey, and they first came into Anatolia a long time ago, between like 4400 and 4100 BC. Um, and they're split off from the Indo-European language, and that's all I really have to say for them right now. But I do
Yeah,
want to
like
mention
we
them.
kind of mentioned is there's which why last episode was a little bit longer because we wanted to cover kind of what was going on in the different regions, but we don't have decade by decade details about a lot of these regions, so it's sort of going to be they're kind of just doing what they were doing
We're
before.
doing, yeah, we're not going to mention every single group every single time. Yeah, we'll probably just check in on them, and then yeah, like for example, this, if I realize I forgot to mention a certain group, I'll throw them in, and we'll see how it goes. But
Yeah.
they're up there. And also, while I'm mentioning that, again, we're really just talking about the major centers of civilization and large density of people. But, all around the world, there are people. They're like hunter gatherer. They're just not in a city. They're just kind of like on the land. So, just to remind everyone.
Mm.
Then we're going on to China, and the only real update I have for China was I just found a really useful chart here that is showing me just to lay out what was going on. So the is it pronounced? It's XIA, but it's like Sha or something.
I
How do you
think
pronounce?
so.
I
I'll have to
forget,
ask.
but that starts in 2070 BC, and that goes all the way until 1600, and that's when we're going to get the Shang dynasty.
Which
So
is the
until
first
we
one
get
we kind of know stuff about.
Yeah. So until we really get to 1600, we probably won't have a ton to say about China, but I always like thinking about that this is the time period when like the Chinese legends would be kind of happening, like the
Yes.
legendary emperors and kind
I
of
mean,
same
a
with a
lot
lot
of
of these
people think
places.
this dynasty didn't actually exist because it's
Hmm.
not, there were definitely people there, but they wouldn't fashion themselves this way, didn't see themselves as China. It wasn't until the next dynasty came and the third dynasty that they
Hmm.
kind of pointed back to the first dynasty again as kind of a legitimacy, as a we're carrying on their tradition. But it's
Hmm.
even funnier in this case with the second dynasty being like, hey, we're just following what the first dynasty was doing. It's like, wait, who's the first dynasty? Like, oh, you haven't heard. You haven't heard the stories.
Yeah, and I feel like it can be hard to even even if we knew everything, like at what point do you start calling something like a dynasty, Like if there's just some like random city state that's happens to be in China that has like a king for a while that's like has a lot of power. It's like, okay, is that a dynasty, or is that just sort of
Hmm.
like going on? Because it does say that like in this general time period, it's the Bronze Age, so they're using bronze, and there are flood control efforts of the Yellow River. So just like you learned in, like seventh grade history or fifth grade, whenever you learn this, It's all about the rivers. We got Egypt, we got the Tigris and the Euphrates for Mesopotamia, and then we got the Yellow River for China. So there are some groups of people that are trying to control the river and use it to their advantage, and then that's where this myth of like an emperor who like single-handedly like, you know, controls the whole river comes from, is that like, that was kind of happening and then they just blow it up into like a legendary thing.
Yeah.
And then another thing we didn't talk about last week is Japan. And as, two gamers, we how can we not mention Japan? But at this time, it is the Jomon period, and that's from 14,000 all the way to 300 BC. So super super long. And so what's going on in Japan is these Jomon people are hunter-gatherers and early agriculturalists, and they have a common culture. They're somewhat sedentary. It's believed their ancestors came from a couple different places, kind of just Korean Peninsula, parts of China, north, essentially all the coastline of like China and all those countries. And they eventually mix with the Japonic speaking Yayoi people. So we're
Yeah.
going to be sitting with the Jomon for quite some time. But it's interesting because apparently they were strangely similar to like Native American cultures,
Interesting. That's cool.
like in the apparently specifically in the Pacific Northwest, and the culture and another culture in Ecuador had like similar pottery. I don't think it's saying that they like somehow migrated all the way over there. I think it's just like they had similar climates or something, and we're both just like mainly hunter gatherers and stuff like that.
Okay.
Okay, so we are now in Europe. Unless there's anything you wanted to add about.
There is not. Again, I've done a lot of my research on some of the bigger areas, I'll be
There,
honest.
no, no, same, same. So in Europe, I don't think I mentioned this last time. In Eastern Europe, there's the corded ware culture. So sort of like the bell beakers. These guys are more east. And what's kind of cool is last week I talked about the bell beakers. So that's Western Europe. And one thing about them is that they're not distributed across like a contiguous area. It's not just like, okay, we can see their artifacts all over like Western Europe. They're in like these little concentrations. So it seems like they kind of just had like centers of power spread around Europe. But apparently the Rhine river is
Ooh,
like
another river.
the dividing line, another river. But in this case, it's the dividing line between the bell beakers and the corded ware who are in Eastern Europe. And yeah, the corded ware are let's see, they're also known as the centasha, and again they have bronze, and which is apparently rare. So they're like from the steppe. They're from all these people that ride on horses always come from the steppe, which is kind of near like the Black Sea. I think it's like above the Black Sea.
Mm-hmm.
But
Nomadic.
apparently it's rare for that culture to have metallurgy, which kind of makes sense if you're basically like nomadic riding around on horses. But so they sound pretty cool. And they have a high level of militarism and extensive fortified settlements, of which we know 23. So in England, like I said, there's Stonehenge kind of being worked on. And they actually, the Bell Beakers are also in England. I looked that up because I was curious. And in England, apparently, there is the Bell Beakers, the descendants of earlier Neolithic farmers, and like some other regional people. Before we leave Europe, we've also got, if we go further south, the Minoans. I think I want to say last week I might have messed up another correction and said that we're in the pre-Minoan period, but we're actually fully in the Minoans, and they just lasted for a really long time. So they apparently go all the way from 3100 BC all the way until 1075 BC. So
Damn.
like 2000 years or something, or yeah, about 2000 years. And right now in Minoa, they are in the end of the pre-palatial period. So there's all these periods that get divided up, but it's about to become the proto-palatial period, 1925. So we're not quite there yet, but what's going on there is there's a lot more population growth in cities like Knossos, Phaistos, and Malia, and major construction projects. I'm assuming palaces. I guess that's why it's palatial. And they are using new colorful paints. They invent the potter's wheel, or they adopt it at least. I don't know if they invent it, and they start making their pottery is called Kamara wares,
Interesting.
which sort of looks like what you would think. All right, we're gonna go before we get to the Americas. Wanted to mention, I guess you'd say Oceania. So we got like Australia. Again, I feel like maybe last week I said they were doing like slash and burn agriculture, but they're not farming. They're doing hunter and gathering, but I think they would light fires, but it was more about kind of I guess getting animals to like leave run around and then you can like hunt the animal and stuff like that. They have like rock art. They're making rock art in Papua New Guinea and the islands around there. They've got early horticulture with taro, yams, and bananas, and there's inter-island trade. And then in Polynesia, they're again still not expanding, but there are like little coastal settlements. Like they're essentially sailing between the islands that are nearby, but they haven't spread out all the way into the tiny islands in the middle of the Pacific. And then, yeah, so now we are in the Americas, and we're going to start with South America.
I mean, we're probably
Um,
still just with those Peruvians, if you will.
yes, the Peruvians are there. They're growing maize and potatoes, and they have like fishing societies.
Cotton. It's a big one
Oh, and
too.
cotton, right. In the Amazon, they're doing some, I guess they are doing slash and burn agriculture in the Amazon. And there is not really complex urbanization though, but they have just little communities there. Again, all this stuff, who knows, as we learn more, like as we get doing laser scans and probably using AI somehow, we're gonna find out more about. I feel like the Amazon is one of the still most like mysterious regions, just because there's so much covering all the trees and everything.
Hmm.
Not only is it covering it, but it deteriorates so quickly. And last but not least, we're back home in America, North America. What we got going on here in really more like Mexico is in the Oaxaca and Gulf Coast region. They're going maize, beans, and squash, which I think are called the Three Sisters. They grow
They
them
grow. It's because they
together.
all complement each other. They grow well, very well together.
Yeah, it's like
The I actually know because they said
maize. The
yeah, the
maize
corn grows
grows
tall,
tall.
the beans grow on the corn,
It grows
and
up it like a vine.
it
Yeah.
grows up it, and then the squash leaves are big and broad, so they shade the
Yeah.
ground, which prevents other
Yeah.
growth and keeps it a little more moist and damp, so that the beans and the corn can retain water.
It's cool. I love stuff like that because it makes you realize how simple things can be where you don't have to invent like this crazy technology to like fertilizer and, some sort of shade. It's like, okay, the plants themselves can like literally work together to
Yeah.
do the same thing like more efficiently. And we've got the Olmecs. actually, no, sorry. This is actually still the pre-Olmec. So we're not at Olmec. They're not going to get there until 1200. But now moving up into North America in the Mississippi region are hunter-gatherers. We're not quite at they're called the mound building cultures. So just like in Egypt and in Mexico and different places, people like to build pyramids because it's kind of an easy way to build something that's going to last for a while. It's just an efficient way to build something is big at the bottom and skinny at the top. So
Hmm.
they're eventually going to do that. And on the northwest coast, they're fishing, and eventually they will be the people that have totem poles, which I just enjoy. But that's really pretty much all that's going on.
Yeah, no, you really
Oh,
covered a lot of things,
that
but
was a lot. I know. That
it's
was a
just a lot
lot.
of hunters and gatherers
A
with
lot of
different kinds
hunting
of
and a lot of
technology.
gathering.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think next week I'll try to like get maybe I won't mention as much, but I'll get more into the details of like one or two of those maybe. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say about the podcast. Well, like for this episode, we did 2 decades. We did from 2000 to 1980. So our plan for the next episode is keep up the same trend and do 1980 to about 1960. And again, these are still approximate. We're not doing exact
We're kind of picking when
years.
big events happen and talking about those because
Hmm.
if we stick too hard to just exactly 2 decades or 1 decade, we're kind of ending right before a major event or starting right after one.
Right. It'd
So,
be weird if like some major like kingdom collapses in like 1979 and we just don't even say anything. We're like, yeah, and everything's great.
yeah.
All right. Well, that was episode 2 of the Last Decades podcast. As I said, we have an Instagram. It's Lost Decades Pod on Instagram. I'm gonna post clips there, and it'll send you the link to find the podcast if you can't find it on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Leave a review, leave a comment. Yeah, maybe we'll get an email address going up. Um, but until next week, I'm Austin.
Andrew.
See you next time.